Father, thank you for your care for us and the gift of salvation. We thank you for your word, and we thank you that you give us the opportunity to know you. We ask you to bless our Bible study this evening. In Jesus' name, amen. We're in the 48th chapter of Genesis this evening. And when we finished the 47th chapter, one was that Jacob had been in Egypt for 17 years. He got there when he was 130. Now he is 147. This is the end of his life. And so we'll see this in the next two chapters, the ending of his life. And so it starts out this time. It says, "Sometimes later, Joseph was told, 'Your father is ill.' So he took his two sons, Manasseh and Ephraim, along with him. When Jacob was told, 'Your son Joseph has come to you,' Israel rallied his strength and sat up in the bed. Jacob said to Joseph, 'God Almighty appeared to me at Luz in the land of Canaan, and there he blessed me, and said to me, I'm going to make you fruitful and will increase your numbers. I will make you a community of peoples, and I will give this land as an everlasting possession to your descendants after you.'" So he's talking about when he left Beersheba and he was going to Padan Aram, and there on the way he stopped at this place called Luz, which he renamed Bethel later on. Now, at this particular place, God has an encounter with him, and yet what he had just experienced was that earlier on, he had he had bought Esau's birthright. Esau was the older of the two twins, and he had bought the birthright of Esau, and Esau, he sold it for a bowl of soup, a bowl of stew. And so he got the birthright. And then, that's one part, and then he later on deceived his father, Isaac, who couldn't see, and deceived him into believing that he was Esau, and he then stole the blessing from Esau. So we see here that there's two items here. One is the birthright, and the other is the blessing. And I'll talk a little bit more about the blessing in a bit, but the birthright is to go to the firstborn, and that means that the firstborn son, the firstborn son, gets twice as much as the other boys in the family. So if there's two boys, one would get twice as much as the other. He would get 2 times, and the brother would get 1 time. So you multiply whatever it divided by 3, and then so now if you had 10 brothers, then it'd be less, but he'd still get twice as much as everybody else. So that's the idea of the birthright. However, it was more than just an inheritance. It was also the fact that it was a position of leadership. You're considered the leader, and in that position, you're kind of like the family priest. But we would more think of it as leadership. So the blessing is about the future of the main blessing that we're usually talking about here is the blessing that God has given to the one who's going to carry on this promise that he made to Abraham. So that's an important thing to understand. Now, there are other blessings that kids would get, by the family, and have a good life, or just you're going to be rich, or you're going to have a nice property, or whatever. There would be a blessing for them, and blessings from the leadership of the family was a very serious thing. So in Genesis 27:36, this is where we can recognize that there's two issues here, the birthright and the blessing. So this is when Esau was found out that Jacob had stole his blessing. Then he comes back and finds out from his dad he's already given the blessing to Jacob. So verse 36 says, Esau said, "Isn't he rightly named Jacob? He has deceived me these 2 times. He took my birthright, and now he's taken my blessing." Then he asked, "Haven't you reserved a blessing for me?" So we see there's 2 issues here, a birthright and a blessing. So what Jacob, as he's talking to his son, Joseph, he's recounting to him one of the most, well, probably the most important event in his entire life. And that's when God appeared to him in a dream at Bethel on his way out of Beersheba, on his way to Padan Aram. And so in Genesis 28, starting in verse 10, he says, Jacob left Beersheba and set out for Haran. When he reached a certain place, he stopped for the night because the sun had set. Taking one of the stones there, he put it under his head and lay down to sleep. He had a dream in which he saw a stairway resting on the earth with its top reaching to heaven, and the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. There above it stood the Lord, and he said, "I am the Lord, the God of your father Abraham, and the God of Isaac. I will give you and your descendants the land on which you are lying. Your descendants will be like the dust of the earth, and you will spread out to the west and to the east, to the north and to the south. All peoples on the earth will be blessed through you and your offspring, and your offspring. I will be with you and will watch over you wherever you go, and I will bring you back to this land. I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you." So we see some indications here that this is the same promise that he had made to Abraham. One of the key issues here was all people on earth will be blessed through you. That was the promise that he had made to Abraham. Well, this is also a promise to Abraham and to Isaac and to Jacob now, that there is a Redeemer that's going to come. And of course, the one who's going to bless all the people of the earth is Jesus. So this was an important blessing that he got. So this was a confirmation blessing he had received from Isaac. Now he had just received this blessing from Isaac, his father thought he was blessing Esau, but the blessing went to Jacob. And this is what it says in Genesis 27:27. It starts there. So he went to him and kissed him. When Isaac caught the smell of his clothes, he blessed him and said, "Ah, the smell of my son is like the smell of the field that the Lord has blessed. May God give you heaven's dew and the earth's riches, and abundance of grain and new wine. May nations serve you and peoples bow down to you. Be Lord over your brothers, and may the sons of your mother bow down to you. May those who curse you be cursed, and those who bless you be blessed." And of course, those 2 items were also on the covenant that he had with Abraham. So there at Bethel, which was called Luz, that night that he slept there and saw the ladder to heaven, so God confirmed to him that he was now, shall we say, the promise bearer. He is the one that God is using to carry on this promise. So that promise went from Abraham to Isaac, and now it's gone to Jacob. And so he promised him that the land he was on, that's Canaan, was going to be his. It was going to be, where he was going to, that's going to be their homeland. So verse 5 says, "Now then, your 2 sons born to you in Egypt before I came to you will be reckoned as mine. Ephraim and Manasseh will be mine, just as Reuben and Simeon are mine. Any children born to you after them will be yours. In the territory they inherit, they will be reckoned under the names of their brothers." So what's happening now is that Jacob now is adopting Ephraim and Manasseh as his own. They are to take the place of Joseph. They're not going to be extra on top of Joseph, but Joseph is the one who now is receiving the birthright, the double portion. He's getting two tribes now of the sons of Jacob. He's going to have two sons. Now there are going to be like 13 tribes. So we hear about the 12 tribes of Israel, but there's really, you can say there's 12 if you want to take out Ephraim and Manasseh, put Joseph in there. But when you talk about the inheritance, Ephraim and Manasseh have their own inheritance. So there's 13 tribes, and the land is divided up in 12 different areas for the 12 tribes of Israel, but there's 13 tribes. Well, we find out later that one of those tribes doesn't have any inheritance, and that's the priestly tribe. Their inheritance is God. That was their inheritance. So that's a whole story to be talked about later. So, verse 5, now then your two sons born to you in Egypt before I came to you will be reckoned as mine. Ephraim and Manasseh will be mine, just as Reuben and Simeon. And then he says, the children born, if you have any children born after Ephraim and Manasseh, well, they won't have their own special tribe. Their inheritance will be, they can join whatever brother they want to be with, either Ephraim or Manasseh. But that's who's going to be theirs. So this is a formal adoption, and what's happened now is that Ephraim and Manasseh are taking the place of Reuben and Simeon, those are the first two. And so these are now the ones who are receiving the double portion, which is really Joseph. So now we go on and we talk about that they're going to receive the blessings of just like the blessings of the other children of Jacob. And so we go to verse 7. It says, as I was returning to Padan Aram. So now he's been in Haran, Padan Aram, for 20 years, and he's returning. I was returning from Padan. To my sorrows, Rachel died in the land of Canaan while we were still on the way, a little distance from Ephrath. So I buried her there beside the road in Ephrath, which is Bethlehem. That is Bethlehem. Now this seems a strange verse to put in here. He's talking about the inheritance. He's talking about the firstborn. He's talking about the promises made to Abraham, Isaac, and now to Jacob. But now he throws this verse in there, and he says, when I was returning from Padan, he said, to my sorrow, Rachel died in the land of Canaan. And he says there, which is now Bethlehem. So what is this about? You have to remember that Jacob had one love, and he worked for this woman for 7 years. He loved Rachel. There was no other woman he was concerned about, Rachel only. And he ended up getting deceived and had to marry Leah. And then he was able to marry Rachel after that. And then because of the stuff we've already discussed about having children and not having children and all that, he ended up with two more, the handmaids of Leah and the handmaid of Rachel. And so now he's got these 4 women, and he only really cares about one. So that's his focus. And who is now the oldest son of his beloved wife? That's Joseph. And So he sees Joseph really in two ways. He's not only, in his mind, the one that ought to get the share, the birthright, because that's really the right one. But then because he also is the deliverer, he has delivered his family from the famine and saved the family. So nobody's going to argue with Dad over this, because they all recognize what Joseph has done for the whole family. And so and they also know, everybody in the family knew Rachel was the prize woman, and he put up with the rest of us, so to speak. So she died, and now he had hoped that she would produce more children. In fact, when she had Joseph, she said, I want, this is the sign, I'm going to have more children. And she had Benjamin, and that's when she died, with childbirth with Benjamin. So now, by putting Joseph's two sons as part of the family, an equal share, what he's doing, he's giving Rachel an extra son. Well, really two more sons, because she's already had Joseph. But she's now a mother of four sons in a sense. So that's one of the things about getting the double portion. So Joseph now gets the double portion. But he doesn't, you see, normally when you think about the inheritance, the older son, or whoever gets the birthright, gets a double portion of the inheritance. Well, what's the inheritance of Jacob? His inheritance is in the land. He's going to inherit the land. He doesn't particularly have any inheritance. I mean, he's got cattle and stuff that's really family stuff that he, so, and Joseph doesn't need anything. It's not that he would want, twice as much as his brothers of the cattle and stuff. He doesn't need any of that. But the inheritance, the real inheritance that Jacob offers, is inheritance in the land, because that's God's inheritance to this tribe, this family, this family of Jacob, whose name is Israel. So verse 8, when Israel saw the sons of Joseph, he asked, "Who are these?" "They are the sons God has given me here," Joseph said to his father. Then Israel said, "Bring them to me, so that I may bless them." Now Israel's eyes were failing because of his old age, and he could hardly see. So Joseph brought his sons close to him, and his father kissed them and embraced them. Israel said to Joseph, "I never expected to see your face again, and now God has allowed me to see your children too." Well, the first thought is, well, he can't see. How can he see his children? Well, this is something he's probably said many times for the last 17 years. He probably said it the first day when he met Joseph and his sons. God has now blessed me. So he's been saying this all along. So this is nothing new, and he has seen them. But he's kind of groggy in his sight right now. So verse 12. Then Joseph removed them from Israel's knees and bowed down with his face to the ground. And one of the things in that culture was that in adoption they would put a child on the knee or by the knee of the one who's doing the adopting. So this was a legal way to adopt these two sons. And then verse 13. And Joseph took both of them, Ephraim on his right, towards Israel's left hand, and Manasseh on his left, towards Israel's right hand. Now remember, Manasseh was born first, and then Ephraim. So he puts them in this location so that Israel's right hand would be on Manasseh, and his left hand would be on Ephraim. But Israel reached out his right hand and put it on Ephraim's head. Then he was, though he was the younger, and crossed his arms, he put his left hand on Manasseh's head, even though Manasseh was the firstborn. Yeah, we're getting ready to hear that. Yeah, that's a. The idea of the right hand is the hand that produces the power, you might say. And so Joseph understood the custom that the right hand is the one with the best blessing, shall we say. So he had arranged for Manasseh to get the right hand on his head. So the right hand wasn't on his head. So the one blessing from the hand gets a superior blessing. From that hand, from the right hand, gets a superior blessing. So Joseph knew about, I want you to remember this, Joseph knew about Isaac's blessing of Jacob. And even though Jacob had tricked Isaac and got the blessing, there was a blessing. There was a blessing that was provided, and that stuck. It was a good blessing, and Isaac blessed Jacob, and it was a serious deal. It stuck. So then verse 15, then he blessed Joseph and said, may the God before whom my father Abraham and Isaac walked, the God who has been my shepherd all my life to this day, the angel who has delivered me from all harm, may he bless these boys. May they be called by my name and the names of my fathers Abraham and Isaac, and may they increase greatly upon the earth. So now he's blessing them. And this blessing is not the blessing that carries with it the promises that God made to Abraham. This is just a blessing in general. So I wanted to make the qualifications here that they received a blessing. Anytime throughout their journeys and whatever, when there was a family and there was the father was about ready to die, well, he had put a blessing on his kids. And so this is what's going on here. This is not the blessing of handing down this right of being the promise bearer as Jacob was. So Joseph is being blessed through his children, because it says that in verse 15 it says, then he blessed Joseph. So he's being blessed in his children. Verse 17, when Joseph saw his father placing his right hand on Ephraim's head, he was displeased. So he took hold of his father's hand to move it from Ephraim's head to Manasseh's head. Joseph said to him, no, my father, this one is the firstborn. Put your right hand on his head. So there we go, Vicky. He stuck up, and there was somebody there, and they knew that you'd be asking that question, you know. So it bothered Joseph that Jacob was doing this. And he understood that this right hand was going to be the best blessing. It was going on Ephraim. So Ephraim will receive a double portion of the inheritance from Joseph, because he's now the older. And yet he's the younger, but he is now considered the firstborn in that sense. And so Joseph, now Ephraim will receive a double portion from Joseph. But Joseph receives a double portion of the inheritance from Jacob in the promised possessions in the land of Canaan. So each is getting their double portion. In verse 19, but his father refused and said, I know, my son, I know he too will become a people, and he too will become great. Nevertheless, the younger brother will be greater than he, and his descendants will become a group of nations. So, he is forecasting, you might say, or prophesying about the future of these boys. And Ephraim is going to be the predominant one. Now, I want you to understand that in the framework of this firstborn, or the one who receives this position, it is a position of leadership. So the blessing to the firstborn is a position of leadership, and I mentioned that before, and some even say, well, that would be also the spiritual leader, but the leadership. So when we think of this as in the sense of leadership, then Ephraim is going to be the bigger leader. And later on, as you read in the Old Testament, there's often that the northern kingdom, after the kingdom is divided after Solomon's death, and there's a northern kingdom and a southern kingdom. The northern kingdom is known as Israel, the southern kingdom is known as Judah. But often, the northern kingdom is referred to as Ephraim, because just like Judah is the leader of the southern two tribes, which is Judah and Benjamin, Ephraim is the leader pretty much of the other 10 tribes. So we go to verse 19. His father refused and said, I know, my son, I know. He too will become a people, and he too will become great. Nevertheless, a younger brother will be greater than he, and his descendants will become a group of nations. In Jeremiah 31:9, it says, with weeping they shall come. Now this is talking about after the people of Israel have been scattered through captivity into other nations, and he's promising they're going to be able to return. So he says, with weeping they shall come, and with pleas for mercy I will lead them back. I will make them walk by the brooks of water, and a straight path in which they shall not stumble. For I am a father to Israel, and Ephraim is my firstborn. So once again, the tribe of Ephraim is mentioned as being the firstborn in this sense. So he is, you might say, has the birthright. Now, what we see here is that over and over again in the book of Genesis, the concept of the birthright or the firstborn does not refer to the order of birth. And we think about that. It refers to who has the preeminence. This is important to understand. Now think about it. You had Abraham, and then who got the blessing? The secondborn. Isaac was the secondborn. And he got the promises, and he got the birthright. And then Isaac had 2 sons, Esau and Jacob. Who did God choose? He chose the secondborn. It isn't based upon the birth order, but upon God's choosing, but it's the second son. And then now he's, Jacob now is blessing these 2 boys, and who does he choose? The second son. So we see this common about second sons, but it is the one who has the preeminence. That's important to understand. that we see this concept in this birthright. It's based upon not the birth order, but on God's choosing. And the one who is chosen is the one who has the preeminence. So, the birth order isn't what's the most important issue here. It's who God chooses. This is who is going to be the one. And when God talked to Abraham about, okay, you're going to have a son, he already had Ishmael. Well, you're going to have a son, and Abraham said, "Oh, that's okay, God. We've already got that taken care of." Well, no, that wasn't God's choice. God's choice was for it to be Isaac, who was going to be born of Sarah, Abraham's wife, not by Hagar. So, anyway, God doesn't choose by the order of birth. And we don't know why God chooses what he chooses. It's none of our business why he chooses what he chooses, who he chooses. So he doesn't tell us why, and we don't need to know, and maybe it doesn't even matter that much. But either way, we have no idea why God chooses who he chooses. But one thing, now this is important to understand, but one thing we do know is he does not choose them because of the birth order. He doesn't choose them because they were born first. That isn't how he makes a decision, even though that was the human way of doing things. That was a human custom. But it isn't how God works. Now, I want to just look at Colossians 1:15. And it says, speaking of Jesus, he is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. Now, again, I want to emphasize firstborn is preeminence. So, was Jesus created first? No, he wasn't created first. In human, he wasn't born as a human first. Adam was. God created Adam first. And then later on, Jesus was born as a human. And that was God's creation as well. But you have to understand that Jesus was preeminent. So he was the one who is called the first, the firstborn of all, over all creation. Now, another thing to understand is that although he didn't enter this world first, as Adam did, he was still there before the creation of the whole world. So but the idea here is that the birth order, Adam, he wasn't really born. I guess Adam wasn't really born. But in a sense he was born because he was made alive. But the importance to understand is who is preeminent. And it is that Jesus is the preeminent one. And so we see this concept of not the firstborn is important, but it is who is preeminent, who God chooses. And so, where did the firstborn ever get anything? It wasn't a great deal for the firstborn. Now, this particular verse, that he is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. The Jehovah's Witnesses say that Jesus was a created being. And so they use this to say that he was created before Adam. So he was the first, he's created first. Well, the only problem with that verse is all the rest of the Bible. and so they missed the point here, that God had his plan and his way of doing things, and it was going to be by God's choice of how things were going to be. So Jesus was the firstborn over all creation because he was the preeminence over all things. So, we're not going to see in the sense of the firstborn. Now, in the individual families, there would be this idea that there would be this idea of birthright, just in general, to the general families, and they would have this idea of birthright. But as far as the birthright in connection with the blessing, we see that it pretty much ends here as far as the nation of Israel, because now the birthright does not belong to a person, it belongs to a nation. Because now the double inheritance went to Joseph, and it is now in the whole nation. That double blessing is in the whole nation. The whole nation now has the birthright itself. So we don't see that as being an issue any longer. The birthright is no longer, we don't hear that about anything to do with what was going to happen as far as the future is concerned, because the birthright has already taken place for the nation, and it's a done deal, you might say, and it's for forever. So Jesus holds the position of preeminence of the firstborn, unlike Adam. He is uncreated. He was there at the beginning. So that's going to be done now, and he is the preeminent one. So the idea of the firstborn now is wrapped up in this picture of this nation of Israel, who is going to be the producer of this promise of Abraham, that through him all the nations of the world would be blessed. So we look at the nation itself as being, the firstborn in this sense, and they're going to not be passing this down to some individual, but all through their history now, they have had this birthright from God. They have this preeminence in the world. And you can look at them today and think, well, they're kind of little, but they're preeminent. just ask some of these nations around them, But nevertheless, they're preeminent. And God's going to use this nation to bring about this promise that he's going to make. So this whole book of Genesis is talking about this preeminence of the firstborn. But again, it's not firstborn, or birthright is not about birth order. It is just what we call the one who is preeminent. But also, it talks about leadership. This is the lead. He's the leader. He's the preeminent leader. And so that's who we're going to see. So we go to verse 20 and say, he blessed them that day and said, in your name will Israel pronounce this blessing. May God make you like Ephraim and Manasseh. So we put Ephraim ahead of Manasseh. And I guess I understand even today that people use that as a blessing. That you'd be blessed as Ephraim and Manasseh. I don't have any firsthand information. I've just read some things that say that. Verse 21, then Israel said to Joseph, I'm about to die, but God will be with you and take you back to the land of your fathers. So now we see the faith of Jacob. He understands this, what God has promised is going to take place. And he's convinced of it. And we're going to see this in the next chapter about how he's convinced of this in a powerful way. And he says, verse 22, and to you, as one who is over your brothers, I give this ridge of land I took from the Amorites with my sword and my bow. Well, what he's saying to Joseph, I'm going to give you a piece of land that I got when I was in Canaan. It's my land. He said, I got it with the sword and my bow. Well, we don't really read a story about Jacob engineering something in a warfare. The only thing we know about is that when his two sons, Simeon and Levi, attacked Shechem and killed off all the males and took everything they had, that was the only thing where we realized that there was a sword and on a bow maybe. But when he's talked about in the NIV, he says, I give the ridge of land I took. Well, in the King James Version, he says, moreover, I have given thee one portion above thy brothers, which I took out of the hand of the Amorites with my sword and my bow. So he's talking about a portion, which that same word is translated Shechem. So where he calls it in the NIV, he says a ridge of land or a portion of land, but the word is Shechem. So it was an area of surrounding Shechem, and so we don't know if that is the same place, but we know he bought land from Hamor, the father of Shechem, and he paid for it. But he says he's going to give this special place to Joseph. Now, we've talked in this chapter about the birthright. And the next chapter, we're going to talk more about this blessing. And so we're kind of putting things together as we begin to leave, as we take a finishing look at the book of Genesis. But the birthright that we're looking at is that this person who is the one with the birthright, or the firstborn, either way you want to look at it, isn't about a birth order. It's about the preeminence that God places upon the person. And Jesus Christ is the preeminent person in all of history. And he is the one with the birthright from God. And so that's going to pick up later on. But in our next chapter, we're going to get into more information about how this structure that's going forward, that's going to go back to this land, is how that's going to work out. But anyway, the important thing to recognize is that God is the one who decides. Human custom or way of doing things isn't how God decides. We're going to follow about how God does things. But the interesting thing to me was that in no occasion was the firstborn chosen. The firstborn wasn't chosen. And it was to demonstrate that just because it's called the firstborn, or the birth, like there's a birth order or birthright or whatever, doesn't fly, because it's God's choice that matters. And we have to understand that in our own life, it's what God chooses that matters. Thank you, Father, for your word and for guiding and directing us to follow your leadership and to recognize that you're going to make choices for us and not something that we can understand why you do what you do. We don't know. It's not our business to know. You know what you're doing. And you have a wonderful and grand purpose for your children and for your kingdom. And just bless this word to us. In Jesus' name, amen.